Hi everyone, I'm Phil Ingrassia, President of RVDA, and I hope you're enjoying the virtual RV Dealers Convention Expo. You know, running an RV dealership has never been more complicated. We've got a flood of new buyers coming into the industry, new hires, new vendors, so there's a lot of ways that people can get into business disputes. I'm joined today by a new RVDA associate member, Tom Kline, who's the lead consultant and founder of Better Vantage Point, a company dedicated to help dealers manage risk. Tom's a former car dealer who is using his experience to help other motor vehicle dealers navigate what can be a tough business environment. Tom, thanks for being here today.
It's great to be here, Phil. Thank you so much.
Tom, your website talks about dispute resolution. What exactly does that mean and how can that benefit dealers?
Great question, Phil. So the first thing is that disputes get very complicated and they quickly will distract a dealer from his main mission, which is selling units and running the business. So what we do at first is we become the finders of fact. We will go in, we'll interview everyone and do a risk assessment for the dealer to let them know exactly what kind of exposure they have. Alongside doing that, we will contact the insurance company and try to make sure that the dealer is fully indemnified, which means that the lawsuit is being paid for by the insurance company, as well as the lawyer's fees, which can be quite hefty. So to protect the dealer, we'll work alongside the insurance company, try to we'll come up with a plan. We'll make sure that the dealer is involved in the plan and how to resolve the dispute the quickest. And then we will sit down with the plaintiff's lawyer and try to get it resolved and get it knocked out so that the dealer can go on and do what they do best, which is sell units.
So you work with the lawyer directly to handle whatever the dispute may be.
That's right. You know, it's important, and first of all, the lawyers are not finders of fact. So getting those facts out early in the dispute, the facts are going to come out eventually anyway. And getting them early means that you have the information and the knowledge to know how to get it resolved the quickest. The second thing that lawyers generally do not do is negotiate with your insurance company. And reading the policy and trying to find the best way to have them indemnify the dealer is a little bit of an art. It's not exactly science. So
what are the kind of disputes that you're kind of getting into or that you see that are common at motor vehicle dealerships right now?
Sure. So disputes always happen on two legs for the most part, which is either customers or employees. So if it's an employee problem, generally they'll go to the EEOC, and you may have a chance to mediate those type of problems. It's important that you get those problems handled quickly, obviously, because you may have a current employee who's disgruntled, and a disgruntled employee spreads poison throughout the organization. Or it's going to be a consumer, and a consumer is generally going to start with either something that happened at the dealership or their dissatisfaction with a product. Or often it happens that you find out about those things from online reviews. So it can be any one of those.
Compliance is a big part of what you do. How does that fit into this equation?
So another good question. So it's important that the dealership have the proper policies and procedures in order that they ferret out the problems before they become too big. So there's a phrase that says the first loss is always the best loss. So if you find out about a problem, getting it resolved quickly is really important. And while it may be painful to get it resolved, that's always going to be the least expensive way to do it. I hear from a lot of dealers, they say, yeah, but we didn't do anything wrong, so I don't know why we should resolve the problem. Well, whether you're right or you're wrong or what the law says or doesn't say, it's still a problem, and it's still going to fester into a bigger problem if you don't resolve it. So the early money that you use to resolve a problem is always going to be the best.
You talked a little bit about online reputation. What other things can dealers get into when things kind of go awry online, which they can?
Yeah, I think it's important, Phil, for the dealerships to have a dedicated person or either outsource the online reputation function. So I know of many instances actually where class action lawsuits start from an online complaint, or lawyers will find the online complaints, or the customer will find the lawyer to do something about the online complaint. Oftentimes the consumers never complain to the dealer. So the first time a dealer may know about a problem is when they get served with papers. So it's important that every day they go online, look and see who's reviewed, what the reviews say, and then have a process internally for determining who that customer is, what the situation is, and then you pick up the phone and call the customer. I also recommend that they respond to the complaint online or have a service do it. Nothing defensive, just thank you for the post. We'd like to help you. Something helpful and friendly. And then you get the problem resolved with the customer. Afterwards, the best practices is afterwards after you've resolved the problem with the customer, you go back and you say to the customer, I hope we resolved your problem, and they'll say yes, and say, would you mind going online and updating your review? We work really hard to make our customers happy, and it kind of hurts my feelings that this review's up there. So if you'd update it, I'd really appreciate it.
I think that dealers need to respond directly. I mean, you see that people understand disgruntled customers in a retail environment are going to happen, I think, generally. And if there's a genuine response from the dealer, I think that goes a long way to kind of, oh, this guy's off somewhere, and this is an unreasonable complaint that the person has.
Right. I mean, I think it's just to add to that. I think it's important in the phraseology and how you handle the customer. If you ask them to change their review, they get defensive. If you ask them to update it and say, hey, can you just let everyone know that we're not such bad guys after all, or something soft, they're generally 80% of the time, I'd say, they're willing to do something about it. If you ask them to change the review, then they feel manipulated. And they feel like the only reason that you're helping them is specifically for that review. So I think it's important that you go slowly, that you do it in a measured way, or that you have your vendor do it in a measured way, and make sure that the customer gets resolved and is happy.
Great point. As the year has gone on, we've seen dealers in their advertising increasingly move to digital right now. And you provide some advertising review services as well. How does that work?
So what we do to help dealers stay out of trouble, which is what our job is. We get them out of trouble if they're in trouble and keep them out of trouble if they get in trouble. But the advertising review is they will send us their ads or their online ads or how they're doing things to make sure that they don't run afoul of all the various advertising laws. And it gets complicated. For example, I was on one RV dealership recently, and they didn't include their processing fee or dock fee. Everybody has a different name for it. They didn't include that in the payment, and it wasn't disclosed in the disclaimer at the bottom. So it would be considered a deceptive ad if a customer says, hey, I want this vehicle right here and sell it to me, and I want that payment. And what do you mean there's a processing fee? That wasn't a part of the ad. All of a sudden you get into a line of law called the Unfair and Deceptive Practices Act, which really gets nasty because it can include treble damages and you having to pay for the consumer's attorney's fees, those kinds of things. So it's important that you review it. right down to, some dealers put payments on the side of their units. There should be a small little piece of paper in the window that says, this payment is based on X dollars down at X dollars APR for so many months, plus taxes and processing fee or whatever it is. Without that little piece of paper in the window, just putting up, you can get this travel trailer for $329 a month, that's considered deceptive. It may be nitpicky, but it is deceptive.
Right. And, I think that while the ad agencies do a great job in general of helping dealers comply with the advertising, doesn't hurt to have another set of eyes on those ads, right?
That's right. And that's one of the things we do when we go in initially is we take a look at everything, and not only the advertising, but the rest of the compliance too. But that's certainly part of a general overall review to make sure that what areas the dealers need to work on.
As a former car dealer, a lot about things that go on in the upper management area. Are there areas where the dealer could be personally liable for some non-compliance or disputes?
Yes, and it's scary. I've been in dealerships as an example in their service department. One of the things I do when I walk around is I see the oil tanks, both the new and the used oil tank. I was at a dealership recently which had 4 tanks all on a concrete pad, no bollards around it. And that means if a car or an RV loses its brakes, they hit those oil drums, the oil drums rupture, spill oil, a dealer can be held personally liable for that oil spill, especially if it goes into the drain, gets into the rivers, or any of that. A dealer can be held liable for that personally. So making sure you have the right insurance to protect against those kind of things is really important. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, as far as insurance checkups, you will kind of review the coverages for a dealer?
Absolutely. When you buy insurance, buying the least expensive product is probably not the right way to go. If you have assets to protect both at the dealership and personally, it's really important that you review the coverage forms, see what's covered and what's not, and know where your chinks are in the armor, so that you can try to bolster your policies and procedures around that to make sure that if anything happens, you can catch it early. And again, the first loss is the best loss.
Speaking of policies and procedures, RVDA has spent some time educating dealers on the IRS 8300 cash reporting form. But as people change through the dealership, sometimes, people aren't aware of these rules. How can you help in that area?
Yeah, the IRS 8300 fill is actually pretty scary because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. This is the cash reporting rule that if a dealership gets $10,000 or more in cash or cash equivalents, and cash equivalents I'll come back to in a second, that you're required to report that to the IRS. Failure to do that can lead to fines up to $1.5 million for the dealer and potential jail time for knowingly or willingly not trying to comply with the rule. If you're trying to comply with the rule and you make a mistake, I think it's $50 or $100 penalty. But if you don't have the right policies in place, then it can be very severe. One reason it's so confusing, it's cash or cash equivalents. So if somebody puts $5,000 of money down, and then they put a $6,000 cashier's check, all of a sudden that's considered $10,000 cash according to the IRS. Any loans that are not noted on a bank check are considered cash. Traveler's checks are considered cash. So it's important that you have a system or a methodology or one person at the dealership who's responsible for tallying those accounting records or having a way to do that. It can be done manually. It can be done through the computer, but it has to be done. It's really important, and the IRS has been concentrating on that because of domestic terrorism and foreign terrorism and drug money and laundering money and all those kinds of things. This is the way that they can catch it, and they hold the dealers responsible.
And they haven't changed the limit either. It's been $10,000 for a long time, right?
It has been.
And with new buyers coming in who don't have trades, I think it's something that dealers, need to pay attention to more than ever right now, because they're just they're dealing with people that have never bought an RV before and may put a bunch of different resources together to make that down payment versus having a trade.
That's right. They might get their their brothers or mothers or whoever to help them with the down payment, and that's important depending on where those checks come in, or whether that's cash or whether they write a personal check. Personal check's not considered cash, but those other instruments are considered cash.
Right. Well, just to wrap up here, when you and I were first talking, you made the remark that what your service can provide is almost a independent contractor staff person to help on these compliance issues if the dealership doesn't have somebody on staff who can handle these kind of things on a day-to-day basis or a month-to-month basis, whatever that may be. Is that right?
That is correct. What we do is we'll go in and act as that particular staff member, come in on a monthly or every 2-month basis or weekly basis, depending on what the needs are. Usually it's a lot more time up front, getting everything together. And then, for example, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis or monthly basis, training the managers and making sure they understand the policies and procedures. Best practices is to make sure that you have a sign-off when you do training, so that everybody signs that they understand what the policy is and that they'll follow it, and that goes in the personnel file. That way, if a regulator comes in and says, hey, you guys aren't complying with these laws, you go back to the personnel files and say, hey, we just trained on this, here's where everybody signed off. If a regulator comes in, you're going to write a check. It's just a question of how big the check's going to be. It can be a small check if you're doing the right things, or it's going to be a big check if you're not trying to comply with the laws.
Well, hey, Tom, thanks a lot for spending some time with us. If folks want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, great. So my number's up on the screen. It's 757-434-7656. You can go to the website, www.bettervantagepoint.com, or if you want to email me, it's Tom K, as in Tom Kline, at bettervantagepoint.com.
Well, great. Thanks a lot for being here. And these are really important compliance issues. And thanks for being a part of RVDA and spending some time on these important issues with us today.
It's my pleasure, Phil. Thanks for having me.